The G20 summit wrapping up in Delhi with both the US and Russia praising a declaration that did not overtly condemn Moscow for its war in Ukraine. Well, let's get out to Martin and Tanvir, who have been across this story in Delhi for us. And guys, a compromise on the wording here.
Indeed, yeah, it was a bit of a surprise that they ended up with coming up with a joint declaration or joint communique, final communique at all. But yes, you're right. Watered down language and also weaker than the previous statement from the Bali summit back 9 months ago, which was already a compromise document. But Dan, the G20 summit wrapped up late last night. But Tanvir, the story has already moved on. In fact, it moved on before the summit was even over.
Oh, absolutely. And as we speak right now, there's an ongoing bilateral between Prime Minister Modi as well as Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian delegation, that is for a possible energy pact. And we're not just talking fossil fuel energy, right? We're talking about renewables here as well.
Yeah, that's right, indeed. So, which is why, I don't know whether you can see it behind me, but we're near Parliament, where a complex of government buildings are, and the flags that are flying right now, they're interspersed. There are Saudi Arabian flags along with Indian flags as well. So the deal that Tanvir was referring to, there are reports that they're going to sign an energy pact, as it were, which is going to involve a couple of things. One, cooperation in terms of renewables, as well as eventually, this is going to take time, actually sharing electricity through an undersea grid and use of cables there. So this is apparently supposed to be announced today.
It is supposed to be announced. In fact, the announcement can come by any moment now, which we would be tracking for you. The other interesting story is, while the G20 may be done, as you pointed out, Martin, the bilaterals are not. So one bilateral is happening here. President Biden is already in Hanoi, and he's making headlines about diversification of global supply chains. And it's just interesting how he has very naturally planned his itinerary. First stop in India, next stop in Vietnam, sending a strong signal to China about not just diversification of global supply chains, but also be mindful of the 10-line map and increasing military cooperation with the ASEAN region.
Indeed. And in Hanoi, the Vietnamese capital, Biden was talking about his travels, the, I guess, intense diplomacy we've seen on the part of U.S. officials, including President Joe Biden in the last couple of weeks. But he insists it is not actually meant to counter China. Take a listen.
What this trip was about. It was less about containing China. I don't want to contain China. I just want to make sure we have a relationship with China that is on the up and up, squared away. And we have an opportunity to strengthen alliances around the world to maintain stability. That's what this trip was all about. Having India cooperate much more with the United States, be closer with the United States, Vietnam being closer with the United States, it's not about containing China. It's about having a stable base in the Indo-Pacific.
So U.S. President Joe Biden there speaking from Hanoi. So that is the official line, the official version. What we do know is he's traveling with a very large contingent of senior U.S. business executives from companies like Intel, like Boeing, etc. And we're likely to hear a lot of potential investment deals in the days to come. We've already heard about Boeing, which landed a massive order for 50 737 MAXs worth about $7.5 billion, and that's probably not the end of it.
So it's interesting that he said that this is not about containing China, this is not about countering China, but is it about countering BRI, which is also, of course, a big agenda on the table as far as the G20 is concerned. We had a conversation earlier on with a lot of delegates and a lot of speakers about the potential going forward. The connectivity corridor between India and Europe highlights that obviously the West is very excited about having a parallel corridor, trade corridor, which can circumvent supply chains coming in from Russia and China. It's just interesting that we touched base and got a soundbite from Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni on how Europe is not so much focused on BRI alone, but its relationship with China extends beyond the BRI. This is what she told us.
We have a strategic partnership with China, and so there is the issue of the Belt Road Initiative. But it is not the only element that builds our bilateral relationship with China. This is demonstrated by the fact that there are European nations which in recent years haven't been part of the Belt and Road, but have been able to forge more favorable relations with China than we have sometimes managed. The issue is how to guarantee a partnership that is beneficial for both sides, leaving aside the decision that we will take on the BRI.
Because one of the logics put out there, Martin, has been that this connectivity corridor is about countering BRI, right? So that's also something that of course, is something that obviously the G20 members are trying to say that, look, China is still very much in, China is not out, because a lot of these nations are balancing their equation between the US and China at this stage, Europe, the Middle East, and India included.
Indeed, and with regards to this economic corridor, this is by land, by rail, also by sea, connecting India through the Middle East to the EU. The counter-argument against this whole spin that it is meant to be, is meant to counter China or counter BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is when you take a look at the details, in terms of the Middle East and their investment in telecoms, also communications infrastructure, most of that investment has already come from China. So the Middle East has played their China card already. It
has, and we'll be watching out for the BRI summit that's coming up in October, where President Putin is expected to meet with President Xi. That's another story that's moving this one forward, where, of course, 90 countries have confirmed their attendance. Martin, they're talking about how 3,000 projects have galvanized about $1 trillion worth of loans in the last 10 years under the BRI scheme. So a lot has happened on that front already.